Well, I think I'll get going now. Elsa Rowe, my colleague, will be letting people in as they join. My name is Trudy Briggs. I am the Adult Services Librarian at Merrill Memorial Library in Yarmouth. My colleague and I, Elsa Rowe, will be moderating tonight, and we're welcoming Shirley Hagar and Barb Martin. We're very, very excited to host this Zoom readers book discussion of a wonderful book, and we're very glad that those of you who are here could join us. We are recording this event, so if you know of anyone who wasn't able to make it, we'll be posting links on our Facebook page and also links to the recording tomorrow. So I'm so happy that we were able to do this, and I'm glad that we are not out in this cold weather driving around in this very, very cold day. So the Merrill Memorial Library and the Yarmouth History Center are co-sponsoring this event. We've been talking about it for a long time. We started talking about doing this when it was a beautiful May day and then into July. So here we are in January, and we're very glad to have you here. We're hosting the authors, two of the authors of the book, The Gatherings, Reimagining Indigenous-Settler Relations, by Shirley Hagar, and please accept my mispronunciation, and Mobi Hohat. So they can correct me when I'm done. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to have Shirley and Barb present to us. And at the end, if you have questions throughout our book discussion or author visit, you can have them address them in the chat, and Elsa Rowe will keep track of them, and we will funnel them to the writers. And at the end of the session, if we want some informal questioning, we can turn our cameras and our audio on and do that. But for the time being, we'll have you address your questions in our chat. So I think that let me just give you a little brief background on the authors, and then we will open this up. So Barb Martin is a Mi'kmaq woman from the community, and please, I'm working on my pronunciation, Esjing Burnt Church, New Brunswick. Since 1995, she has co-owned Han Martin Associates, a consulting firm helping communities and organizations achieve their goals, particularly when these involve building relationships and working with diversity. Barb is currently the program manager of Okay, thank you. Wellness team. Thank you, Barb. Serving 4 Indigenous communities. She was the recipient of the 2011 Honoring Our Peoples Award from the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chiefs for her work with residential school survivors and in recognition of her contributions to improving the health of First Nations people in Atlantic Canada. She is a co-author of The Gatherings. Shirley Hagar lives in Chesterville, Maine. She is a retired associate professor with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. Currently, she serves with the Friends Quaker Committee on Maine Public Policy and chairs its Committee on Tribal State Relations. She's a trained facilitator with the Center for Courage and Renewal. Shirley coordinated the gatherings that are the subject of this book and is the book's lead author. And I would like to present to you Barb and Shirley. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Trudy, and also Elsa for being our IT person tonight. I want to thank the Merrill Memorial Library and the Yarmouth Historical Society for co-sponsoring this. It's very exciting, and want to thank all of you who have joined us tonight and for your interest in this book and this topic. Barb and I agreed that I would do a brief couple-of-minute introduction to some background about the gatherings that are the subject of this book. So 35 years ago, I had an experience that changed my life and helped to direct the course of my life. In 1986, I became involved in an organization called the Center for Vision and Policy that had started up in Maine. Its goal was to bring people together to create a vision for Maine, actually for the whole Gulf of Maine bioregion, that would blend together ideas of economic, social, and environmental sustainability into a model for how we could all live together in this region. One of their first decisions, and a pretty unique decision for the time, was that the voices of the Wabanaki people who had lived on this land sustainably for millennia, was that their voices should be part of this vision. And we set out to find those individuals who might want to be part of this effort. We began a year of seeking out interested Wabanaki, including my friend Barb here, who was a member of the New Brunswick Native Women's Council at the time. And we invited them to help us think about how to begin. The result of all these conversations was that the center sponsored a kind of educational forum over a weekend, where we invited Wabanaki individuals to speak to a largely non-native group about their history, our shared history, and current issues in their lives. We repeated that forum a second year, but at the end of that event, which I had organized, I was approached by several Wabanaki participants with an invitation. They said, "We think this effort has promise, but we'd like to propose that we meet in a different way." They said, "We'd rather not be up there in front of you as the speakers and you down there, the audience, but rather we propose to meet in a more traditional way, a way that we would be more comfortable in a circle, around a fire, and including ceremony to help us in our deliberations." They said, "We'd take care of that. We provide the way in which we meet, and your job would be to find the location and get the people there." And it was at that point that everything changed, because we accepted that invitation. So Barb, I would just like to invite you to share why you were interested in being involved in this effort and what it was like for you and really all of us being in those circles together so long ago, once we started meeting that way.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we had this conversation before at Fredericton Inn when you came to visit. And initially, I wasn't interested in gathering with a bunch of white people, or at least that's how I saw the people. I was good friends with Mi'kmaq, who was one of the authors of this book, as well as Kizitanamuk, who is a really important elder in our community. And so is Mi'kmaq at this point in time, in 35 years. So I went because they asked me to, and you had come in, you reminded me not too long ago that you came into our offices of the New Brunswick Native Women's Council. And that was the times when we were really active in political activism, against changing the, working at changing the legislation which discriminated against Indigenous women. So I was a little activist and had you have a chip on your shoulder. Well, I had a boulder on my shoulder. And I didn't think that white people had anything to offer except they were the enemy. And that was my response to, when there is a kind of a clash. And Mi'kmaq, keep in mind, are very militant. I wouldn't say militant in the way that it's understood today, but we were the traditional enemies of the Mohawk, and the Mohawk were a bit nervous about us. So you could see that we were a bit of a group that were used to fighting. And we had been doing that. So I had a lot of assumptions, and I had that attitude. So when they told me to come to this gathering, I grudgingly went because I was, first of all, I was curious. Why would Mi'kmaq and Kizitana bother to come there? There must be some interesting folks. And so we went, and I went with them, and then I saw all these nice folks, and I was more of an observer rather than a participant. More of a in the periphery to do this observation to see if it was worthwhile. And as time went on and I got to know the folks, it became quite, clear. And now, mind you, Alma was very much involved as well.
Yes.
If you've read the book, Alma is an incredible individual. Alma Brooks is one of the strongest Indigenous women I've ever had the privilege to work with. She is the one I was working with when we were doing that political activism and going against Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, and that legislation, which is one of the most colonial legislation in the world. So, she was also very intrigued. And so with all those strong individuals and wonderful people saying that it was worthwhile, I took that chance to continue to work. But I was a young woman, keeping that, in those days, we were all young. And, and so it was, as we grew and into our humanhood, and I had the opportunity to grow as a person and realize that it was just as dehumanizing for me to look at another human being as less than human, which I was doing. I was actually not thinking of those people as human beings. The rest of creation was, part of creation. I thought of Europeans as outside the circle of life. And so they were not human to me. They were the enemy because of all those wars that occurred. But I realized that I was sick with that assumptions, that racism is a sickness. And so that helped me to look at that and look at a relationship in a different way. So it's been a really interesting time. And Shirley, you also helped me in those conversations we had. And, there is a saying among Indigenous people in different parts of the world, when we truly can see one another, to see. So when I told you, I see you, I was saying that not with my eyes. I see you in my spirit, and I saw a really genuine human being who was also on the other side of the coin, looking at that dehumanizing process called colonialism and racism. So I want to thank you for that. I truly thank you, Shirley, for having been part of that journey that I had. I don't know if that answers your question, but you asked.
Well, I want to thank you, Barb, because your participation, and in fact, all the participation of all the Wabanaki in those circles, as I said, certainly changed my life and changed the way I look at just about everything these days. And I just wondered if you would say a little bit more about what happened in those circles, or what was it about those circles that made you want to stay? I mean, your time is valuable, and there's so much in your community that, you serve your community in so many ways. So what was it about those circles that made you decide, this is something I want to support, be part of?
Well, I don't know if folks here understand what a circle is. I think if you read it, I described some of my experience as what in those talking circles.
Mhm.
When we're in a talking circle, and I was a young woman starting to go back to understand my culture, my spirituality, and talking with my elders at the time, when you're in a circle, you are a part, you're one, you belong, and your heart and mind come together. And when you, because my thoughts, I haven't heard the elders, is that civilization or Western civilization, because of Rene Descartes. And by the way, some of my favorite people are librarians and historians. So you guys are really my group that I really enjoy. The history, I love history, and I love books. And so, that is wonderful about Western civilization, is I love books. But what the elders told me as a young woman is that there was a point in time many, many thousands of years ago when, and this really resonated for me, when a human being somewhere, either in the steppes of Russia or in Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, made a really fundamental choice that reverberated through thousands and thousands of years to the point where we are now. And they said, I am better than. So once that happened, they took themselves out of the circle of life, the web of life, and it created a wound. But when you separate the heart and the mind, you create a gap, a wound, and you essentially become insane or crazy. And you create things, you become clever because you're focusing on the mind, you become extremely clever, and you create all sorts of inventions and things to continue on with that process of, irrigation, agriculture, all of this and so on. So I thought about that, and the circle is what helps us to try and heal, or at least bring the heart and mind together again in that ceremony. And when I started observing these folks being able to participate in that circle, and they were so emotional. They were so emotional that they were, because it was bringing connection back. And it's hard to feel bad or, have sort of like be hostile to someone who is really, really feeling that emotion and that experience, because we all feel it. As an Indigenous person, I cannot differentiate myself from and even in this area that's been the most colonized in this area, the Eastern Seaboard, I still can't differentiate myself from the earth. I am the earth and the earth is me. It's just in my wiring, like, you have a computer wiring, it causes me great anxiety if I was to think of myself outside of it. So that was the experience I was observing. And I wanted to help, that's our way of life. If you see that, the spirit. And that's the thing that I wanted to say, the creator is at work here. And I want to see where does this journey take us? And I wanted to heal too. Hatred. I'm going to be honest with all of you. I did not like white people. If anything, there was hatred there for all the messy history that we have. And I didn't like that feeling. And the elders themselves were telling me, don't do that. Hate is a double-edged sword. It will destroy you. So I wanted to do that. And this was my avenue. And meeting all these folks and getting to know them, and to be in relation with was what continued on with me. So a circle, I can't really in this kind of a set tell you what that ceremony does, but you could only, I'm going to ask you, Shirley, what did that experience feel for you when you were in that talking circle?
Well, you're just making me relive it, Barb, by describing this. And for those who haven't read the book, we met over long weekends, 4-day weekends. We would arrive on Thursday and we would leave on Sunday. We did this over 6.5 years, so that we met a total of 11 times. And that's a lot of time together. And we brought food in coolers, and we brought our tents and sleeping bags. And when we weren't meeting in the circle, which we did twice a day for several hours, we were cooking together and hanging out in the evenings. And, you know, the talking stick went around and around throughout the day, throughout the weekend, throughout the years. And not, of course, people came and went, but there was a core group of us, you know, 20-25 people that were very regular. And I say this in the book that after a while, it was this feeling that something in me was being healed, that it was a wound being healed that I didn't know was there. And until I felt it being healed, I didn't know that I carried it. But I've come to feel that we all carry that wound in some way, that comes from the separation that originally founded this country, in terms of what happened, what we did, what our ancestors did to the Indigenous people, and then the additional wound of slavery. I mean, I think we carry those, and there is a healing. You know, we don't. I also, you know, I think we all hoped that in writing the book, we would say we wanted to share what we learned, but we didn't necessarily, we knew people wouldn't necessarily be able to have the experience that we had together. It's why we wrote the book. But that to know that coming together in the way that we came together has healing power, to simply spend the time and have the intention to hear one another's stories. And so, yeah, that was my experience too, Barb, very similar to what you described, was that it was such a good feeling to be in that circle that you just wanted to come back and be there again. And it's kind of a good segue, I think, for me to say that, you know, these connections that we made in these circles, the gatherings ended in 1993, but many of us stayed in touch throughout the years since then. Relationships were formed. We visited in each other's homes. We went to weddings. We got involved in projects together. And so in 2008, some circumstances brought some of us together in the same place. And we talked about this idea of writing a book about our experiences. What we learned, we felt that there was still such misunderstanding and conflict in so many ways in our country between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And maybe we would have something to say to that. So these connections gave rise to the creation of this book, as Trudy showed you, the Gatherings, which was just published in April of 2001, last year. And I thought we would share a little bit, Barb and I, about the creation of the book, because it was a coming back together again in a very intentional way for many of us. Initially, 10 of us got back together. We had a first reunion, and then we identified 4 others that we wanted to be involved. And we agreed it was incredibly important that everyone involved in the book would have full authority, not only over their own words and their own story in the book, but the book as a whole, so that by the end, everyone was able to sign off and say, yes, it's not only how I'm represented in the book, but the book as a whole. And we had input, everyone had input throughout the process. So Barb, I wonder if you could share a little bit. One of the things that I remember, we spent a couple of years going around interviewing people, and in the particular conversation that I had with Barb in creating this book, Mi'kmaq went with me, and the two of us visited Barb in her home outside of Fredericton, New Brunswick, and just had a wonderful, I don't know, 2 or 3 hour conversation. And one of the things you talked very passionately about, Barb, in fact, you gave me a book about it, was scholarship involving Indigenous people and Indigenous authors and the ethics around that. And so we had a long talk about why it was so important that everyone be involved in the whole book. Would you care to say some things about that and what it was like for you to be part of this project?
Okay, so I don't remember that part about scholarship. I do remember your visit, and I do remember the conversations and so on, that this book needed to be prepared. This needed the words, our experiences, because all of us have had many different roles around that circle, and we're bisected by this national line between the United States and Canada, but the experiences are the same. In terms of authorship, it was actually you, Shirley, that insisted. And, because we don't like to push our agenda forward unless we're political activists, and then we push. But it was you who insisted that these words, that we were all the authors, and you that made that, because authors are very ego driven. They want their name out there. I've read a lot of books, and it's a very special thing to prepare a book, especially a book like this that's gone out everywhere. So that was another part I was still observing. And I wanted to acknowledge that you're the one that made that decision, that we were all part. This is all our words. We're still part of that circle. So that's why I wanted to take part. I have a bit of experience being in the United States as a child. It's in the book. I was in New Haven, Connecticut, lovely city. I still have great memories of that city during that time of the civil rights movement, women's movement, history. So I think that this is all part of history. We have a long history. It doesn't end. This relationship is still there. Could you imagine, I don't know how many years ago, 500 years ago, had we really been, coming together as human beings and sharing those gifts with each other? Because Europeans had gifts. They had, they were, well, let me put it this way. I was called folks, white people, but you're very diverse. You come from different countries in your ancestry. But as all those folks, we could have done such great things, but we still can do it today. We're on the cusp of history that is about to change everything. And so I think we need to change our minds about the old ways of doing things. I think we need a different way. In the book, I think we spoke on that. And it was so ironic that the person who introduced us to you gals and guys is Kisitamuk, who's Wampanoag. Who's the ones that greeted the pilgrims when they came over? Who did all that Thanksgiving sort of thing? It was the Wampanoags. And so it's just really history, part of it. And the other thing I wanted to acknowledge, and not part of why I changed my mind, is when I saw you and Wayne. Was it Wayne, the one that came over during as peacekeepers? You were watching when the Canadian government, Wesley attacked our community. I mean, history still played out itself with guns and boats. There were shots being fired in my community of Burnt Church, which has renamed itself as Skinwabadich after we got tired of the church being burned, as well as the school, as well as the band office. I think names have a power. So we changed it back to our original name of Eskinwabadich, which is the gathering ground where we wait for the others. So this is a gathering. I think we're all in gathering right now, and we're waiting. And we're now needing to act because we don't have much time. And that's what the elders are saying, We're at the point of economic and ecological collapse. We are now in a pandemic of epic proportions. So what can we do between us all to put our gifts together and to get through this together? Because I think we can. I'm still an optimist. I still believe we can, but it means changing one's mind and heart. And so, that's where we are. And that's why I think I read the book again. It's like really cool. I want to remind myself of our friends that have passed. I want to honor them. I want to thank you for being there to stand with us, not to go and be violent. You weren't there. You were there as peace. But you stood with us despite how dangerous it could become. So we may need to do that. But it's the ideologies that we have to stand against. I don't want any more shots fired. I think there needs to be a different way. Again, I'm talking around in a circle, Shirley, but I wanted to acknowledge what you did. And that was what is another reason why this book is so important. You took action, and we're in history, which history is still unfolding.
Thank you, Barb. And Barb is referring to in the book, her community was under attack. It was a fishing crisis that was happening. And Wesley, who's a non-native co-author in the book, came up and stood with the Mi'kmaq people in Barb's community and was an observer and did what he was told, as he says in the book. And also just going back to the importance of all of us being co-authors, the point I wanted to make about that is that there's a long, long tradition of non-native people going to Indigenous people and gathering information about cultural traditions, knowledge, and going off and writing a book and making money on the book or getting a degree from writing the book and not giving anything back to the community. And that was what we did not want to happen. And I think we all agreed on that. And so we really wanted a different approach to creating this book. Well, Barb, maybe just a little bit of your thoughts. I have some thoughts about why people would want to read this book, anything that hasn't already been said, things that you think are important or unique about this book.
Well, I were part of it. Just kidding.
Well, I would put that right up there.
Well, it's really hard to say. I love books, as I said, and I'll read things that are come to me. You're librarians. you know, your historians, your folks who are, I'm assuming, are really concerned about a lot of things in community, and you want to learn. So this is like entering into a different territory with with all these folks putting their thoughts and minds together, hearts and minds actually, and it, you know, just you may learn something from this. You might find something that that might be relevant to you. That might be something that helps you bring your heart and mind together. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. Might be just a nice book for you to read. You can say, I've read this book and put it in your book list. Or it might speak to you. And so I think I would just say, like as in any book, have a read. And that's all I can say, really. I think it's a great book, Shirley.
Thanks, Barb. Well, I have some thoughts about that, and that might trigger some of more thoughts from you. I think that we've been told that it's truly a unique book because well, for one reason, the stories are in the participants' own words. And I think we all made a kind of an informal pact that we would be vulnerable and open about our doubts and our fears and our hopes and our anger. And, you know, I really feel that we did that. And there's a great diversity of Indigenous voices in this book. I think it can be easy for non-Native people to think that Native people all think alike, and that's certainly not true. They're just like us in that regard. And so I really love that we have Wabanaki people in the book who are from all of the 4 tribes that are in Maine and the Maritimes, plus Gissatanamuk, who is Wampanoag. We have people who grew up in very remote reserves, and like Barb, who spent part of her childhood in urban Connecticut. So it's, I think it's really interesting from that standpoint. I think we all felt as we got involved in the book that there's some models here for addressing and healing separation between people that goes beyond Indigenous settler relations, that it's applicable to other groups that struggle with a difficult history. And people, more than anything, I think, tell me that this book offers hope, that there can be beneficial mutual relationships between Native and non-Native people, and that one of the staff people at the University of Toronto Press who published this said that he had almost given up that that was the case, and that reading this book gave him hope again, which was a wonderful thing to hear. I also want to say that I feel, I'll say this in terms of Maine, since Barb lives in New Brunswick, that I feel the book gives context for a very current issue that's going on here in Maine. We speak directly about the history of the relationship between the Wabanaki tribes in Maine and the state of Maine, which has been very full of conflict and very paternalistic on the part of the state of Maine. And we talk about, those of you who have been around for a while are probably aware of the Settlement Act that exists here in Maine that governs so much and obstructs so much of the lives of Wabanaki people here in Maine. And this Settlement Act was signed 42 years ago now. And for 42 years, the Wabanaki people have been trying to make changes to that so that it could benefit them. changes that would benefit them. And there's a very important bill that is going to be before the legislature this session, LD 1626. And we talk about the Settlement Act in the book, and also some of the negative impacts that it's had. So I think the book gives you context. I'm very pleased to say that we got a grant from a Quaker foundation that enabled the Friends Committee on Maine Public Policy to give a copy of the gatherings to every legislator and every state official that has anything to do with Wabanaki affairs, as well as each one of the tribal leaders in the state. So we're hoping that it can make some difference. But we are going to send you, Elsa is going to follow up our talk tonight with the recording and include the website for our book, thegatheringsbook.com. And she's also going to send you the website for the Wabanaki Alliance, which is wabanakialliance.com. And the alliance was formed by all of the tribal leadership of the four federally recognized tribes in Maine in order to get this legislation passed. And it's a wonderful website for just getting background on Wabanaki peoples in Maine, as well as the Settlement Act and the importance of changing it. So you're going to get those websites as well. Did you have any other thoughts, Barb, about reading the book?
No, I think they were expecting us to read from the book a little bit.
Oh, yeah, we've got a little, yes. We're going to do just a little bit of reading, not too long, and then we're going to open this up for your questions. So, Barb, would you like to go?
I'm going to read from Mi'kmaqan's.
Oh, you are? Okay.
If you Mi'kmaqan is a Mi'kmaq woman from my community. We have been, I've known her since we were teenagers, and that's many moons ago. And she is a speaker, fluent speaker. And I read in here that she was so embarrassed that she didn't know English well. But when she speaks in Mi'kmaq and then she starts to try to translate what she said, it's pure poetry. She should never be embarrassed because our languages are verb-based. They're relationships, they make connections. And so when she tries to translate, it becomes poetry. And I'm just in agog with admiration for her. And I'm learning my language again. I used to be fluent as a child. So I'm going to read about the gathering. And she says, the last gathering ended nearly 30 years ago, but the relationships have continued. That's been a wonderful experience for me, the friendships that we've developed. By the end, I knew the importance of what we'd done, and I knew some genuine, sincere people. It was a rare thing, you know. What's important is making connections among the members of both communities, the white community and us. This can't happen unless you have a place, a forum to meet. We wouldn't have become friends if it hadn't been for the gatherings. Back then, our communities always had other people representing us. We had representatives who were our elected leadership to women's organizations like the New Brunswick Native Women's Council, people like Barb Martin, Gwen Bear, and Elma Brooks. If there needed to be a meeting with a white organization, they would go. So they were the ones with the experience of working with white people. And when they came home, we would ask them the same thing that my sisters would ask me when I came back from the gatherings. How was it? Creating relationships is simply making that effort to get to know one another in small steps. But every step is really a big step because each one of us represents our families and communities too. Now we can count on our contacts in the white community to help people learn about us. Before, we've always been alone and doing damage control over how we were portrayed in the media. Now we have friends out there who know that we're not what the history books have made us out to be. Because of the gatherings and also because of what the ceremonies have taught me, now in my Thanksgiving prayers, I include everyone. Before, I limited myself to just Native people, but I never felt right about that. It didn't feel authentic. I couldn't put my whole self into those prayers, and so I was denying myself and denying others. So I wanted to share that of Mi'kmaqan's word. So I want to say that when I do my prayers, which I do every evening, every night, to all those out there, I will also pray for you. And you will be in my prayers. So that was my inspiration. Shirley?
Oh, Barb, that's such a wonderful passage from Mi'kmaqan's story. I just love that, and I'm really glad you shared that. I wanted to just offer the last couple of paragraphs the way my personal story ends in the book. Being in relationship with Native people means that you will inevitably be drawn into the political dimension of their world and must choose whether to take on a particular issue as your own. One aspect of white privilege is having the choice of whether to become involved, whereas in most cases they do not. But I came to understand over time that their issues are my issues. And not only because of my love for specific individuals. Our social and economic policies have made Native communities most vulnerable, but they are simply the canary in the coal mine, perhaps especially when it comes to environmental concerns. What is impacting their communities will soon impact all of us. My experience in those circles changed the way I look at everything. News events, historical accounts, politicians' promises, scientific claims, I could go on. Everywhere, I see the absence of the Indigenous perspective, the lack of which means we are all poorer, even in peril. What the dominant culture knows and values, even our ways of knowing, seem clearly deficient in terms of sustaining our life here on this planet. We need the Indigenous perspective, but that perspective has to be honorably earned and freely given. So I think we're open for questions. Thoughts?
Wonderful. We've got one already. So Mary Lou had a question. She texted me. So for those of you who would like to ask a question, just if you could send me a text in the box saying you have a question, then I'll call on you, and I think that would be the most orderly way. Mary Lou, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Sure. First of all, thanks so much, Barb and Shirley, for being here. It's really hearing your voices makes the book come even more alive. So the book opens with Episc 2. We return to that original place. Let's try again. And then Gwen Bear later says, yes, all that happened. Let's make things better now. So I'm thinking about sovereignty legislation and wondering, Shirley, if you could talk about how these two concepts, which I see are related, there's history, and yet here we are now. What can we do now? How does that inform how you or any of us can think about moving this legislation forward? And maybe Barb, for you, as in New Brunswick, you face whatever legislative efforts there are there to bring rights, how this idea that the past is there, but we're in the present, and let's move from the present, which I think are very powerful concepts. And often as white people anyway, I think we get stuck in the past. So those concepts really resonated with me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about how they relate to trying to make change now.
Well, I could give a try in terms of Maine. I have become so aware. I didn't grow up in Maine. I moved to Maine in 1983. But I'll tell you who has educated me most about the history of Maine's relationship with Wabanaki peoples, and that's Donna Loring, who among many things, she was a former tribal representative to the legislature. She most recently served as the senior advisor on tribal affairs for Governor Mills. She no longer is. And she has this great show on WERU in Blue Hill that you can access on the WERU website. Her show is called Wabanaki Windows, and she's been doing this series of talks on sovereignty where she's had historians in and explaining the history in government, the US government to Indigenous peoples, and then more recently, the relationship with Maine. And it is, the relationship of the state of Maine has been so paternalistic toward the Wabanaki people. For a long time, they were considered wards of the state. The funds that were supposed to be for their use were misused and appropriated by the state. In fact, the state of Maine had illegally appropriated the lands that the Wabanaki had, and that was what led to the land claim settlement in 1980, because it was determined that the Wabanaki had a legitimate claim to 2/3 of the state of Maine, because the transfer from Massachusetts, when we were part of Massachusetts, was done illegally and not ratified by Congress. So there was this big land claim that was settled. It was settled. The claim to the land was relinquished. The Wabanaki tribes received some financial compensation for that. But what happened, and that was not fully understood by the negotiators at the time, and in fact, some of it happened once the bill got down to Washington, was that the state took the opportunity to load up the Settlement Act with all of these restrictions that totally, it layers these restrictions onto the lives of the Wabanaki, social restrictions, economic, political, that no other tribes in any other state in the country have. And it has made their lives very complex, and it has made it extremely difficult for them to do economic development on their lands. You can find out much more about it at the WabanakiAlliance.com website. But the tribes, and it was understood by the tribal negotiators that this Settlement Act was supposed to be something that was fluid and could be amended, and the state of Maine has acted as if it was etched in stone since 1980. And it is made, the tribe, just for an example, part of the act was that the tribes could not benefit from any federal legislation meant to benefit tribes unless they were specifically named in the act, in the federal act, which never happens. So they've missed out on 151 laws since 1980 that were passed to benefit tribes in the United States. It's affected every aspect of their lives, and that's just one thing. So Maine's relationship to the tribes lives on in this Settlement Act, and this is probably the best opportunity that we've had to amend this act. There's a lot of support in the legislature, And the Wabanaki Alliance and many, many allies are working very hard to educate legislators throughout the state. It's been heavily a Democrat's bill so far, but we're working very hard to get Republican support because I will tell you that the governor is opposed to this. And we're hoping, and she will surely veto it as it in its current form. And so we're trying to get enough support to override a potential veto. So going to the Wabanaki Alliance website, thinking about getting yourself educated and talking to your legislator about how important this is, and that it is not only for the Wabanaki, that in states that don't have this restriction, the tribes have been able to access so many resources from the federal government, development on their lands that has reverberated throughout rural areas outside of their communities. And a rural state like Maine could be really an economic boon for everyone. So it's to all our benefit to change this act. Does that help? Is that what you were looking for, Mary Lou?
Well, I think it is the why. One of the things that struck me about both of those quotes was, it's like those things were in the past, but we can do this now. It's like bracketing that and saying, whatever that was, we're going to be hopeful and passionate about moving things forward and not stay stuck in the past. I guess that was how to not stay stuck in the past.
And Barb has a lot to say in the book about that and white guilt and how that can get in our way.
Guilt is useless emotion, is what I say. You know, it's doesn't do anything for, so we're not interested in having guilty white people. We're interested in having a truly mutual relationship based on respect. Humility is not the same as guilt. Humility is something really sacred and different, and I won't get into describing what that is. But it is, you know, we can do it differently and relate to one another as human beings. I'm not interested in being anybody's victim, nor am I interested in being anybody's abuser. It's not, it just isn't going to do anything. It's all about power and control, and that works both ways. It's unhealthy. But what I will say about that, about the past and moving forward is, Mary Lou, is keep in mind all along the eastern seaboard of North America, what we call Turtle Island among us, this is the area that was first colonized. We were the buffer, we were the shock absorbers, if you will, of settlement, of colonization. So we've absorbed the full impact of that. And many of us did not survive because of diseases and so on. 90% of our populations all along Wabanaki territory across the seaboard are dead, and they're no longer nations among us, but we remember in our spirits for them. We have something, but those of us who survived, we have something to, you know, we're resilient. We are, and those of you who are still here or recently we are in the same territory. So there is a large land claim here in New Brunswick, and the New Brunswick government, provincial government, which is the analogy to the state government, they're all freaked out. They think we're going to go and throw people out. That's not what we're going to be doing. We want to, it's a very complex process. But what we're saying is that for the past 400 years or so, this is the area that we did not have, the only treaties we did in this area were peace and friendship. Out when we were trying to race you guys, the Americans, to the west, with our Canadian railway system, because we were trying to get there before you guys, so we can say this is Canada. you know, that they were doing all these treaties and they required surrender of lands and rights in exchange for something. But because we did not sign those treaties, this is where we are now saying this is peace and friendship treaty. They're still alive today. And the other aspect is that I keep saying to folks, is this the provincial government in New Brunswick is the most colonial government of all the provinces in Canada. They are, colonialism is embedded in the legislation, in the structure of government. So it's, for us to be able to dismantle that is healthy for all of us, because it is not good for the average New Brunswickers, you know, to live under this kind of system. So we have, again, an opportunity to work together as you do in Maine, to go and sort some things out that will benefit you as well as benefit us. It'll be truly a different relationship that we can forge together. Am I optimistic? Yes. If it doesn't happen now, if it doesn't happen in my children's time or my grandchildren's time, it's going to happen in the future. It's got to happen. We have no choice. So that's my long-winded answer to your question. We can do it together because we have to.
Thank you very much, both of you.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. If somebody has something that they'd like to say, just let me know.
There is a question in the chat that was sent to me. I see it was sent to me rather than everyone. Shall I read it?
Sure, or you could call on the person who wrote it.
Tim, would you like to read your question?
Yes. I said to Shirley, I'd be interested if you and Barb could share one special experience during the gatherings that stands out for you. And I wonder if you have any regrets, something that didn't happen that you wished had, or something that happened which was difficult or painful for you.
You want to go first, Barb?
Sure, really quickly. I know I'm long-winded. Nothing really immense stands out except, you know, the ceremonies and the food and and just sitting together and socializing as human beings together. That really, but is there anything that I regret? No, Tim, I don't regret any of it. I thought it was very interesting. I had fun and I got to know people that would become my friends for life. That's basically it for me.
Well, I have, well, there are many moments that were very special. And one that I thought of just now and that I would describe in the book, we did have quite a few Quakers who were part of this gathering, although by no means were all the non-native people Quakers. But Quakers had a long history of relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada, in Atlantic Canada, as well as in this country. And by the way, the reason that we're, you know, the Wabanaki people, their families and communities, and it was split by this artificial international border, but the Gulf of Maine bioregion is Wabanaki territory. So that is why we had this whole region as the territory that we met in. But at any rate, there were a lot of Quakers who came, and we met at the home of a Maliseet man a couple of times in New Brunswick. And on his property, he had a big teepee, a Western type teepee that he used for meetings and gatherings. And one morning, we hadn't done this before, but one morning, some of the Quakers said that they would like to have Quaker meeting on Sunday morning, and he offered the teepee. And you know, Quakers, at least in this part of the country, tend to meet in a circle anyway. You know, there was a lot that was very familiar to us about sitting in this circle. And so he offered his teepee, and the Quakers had a Quaker meeting in the teepee. And of course, everyone was invited, and so many of the Wabanaki people came and shared that with us. And it was just this moment of exchange that Barb talks about, the beauty of mutual exchange in the book. And that was one of the moments that just really felt that way. And then I will just say, Tim asked about, was there a difficult or painful moment? You know, this wasn't all like chocolate and roses, you know, what we did. You know, part of, as we got more comfortable with each other, we got more open and truthful and honest with each other in the circle. And one evidence of that was that, you know, the Wabanaki people began to share more and more of the pain in their lives, the experience of the oppression that they had experienced, and the anger that they felt. And you know, there were times that people would just stand up and do that, and it would be so passionate, and no one left the circle, no one defended themselves or said, yes, but that's not who I am. People stayed and listened and did not make excuses. And I think that that was one of the most important things that helped to build the trust, that it was a safe place for people to say what they needed to say, and no one defended themselves and no one left. So yeah, it's part of the circle.
So there is a question from Alex Briggs. Alex, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you both so much. And I have been involved with a Wabanaki healing center called Nabizin, and I've actually just kind of fallen out of touch a bit. I sent a text a few weeks ago, and I just wonder if you know of this place and if you know how they're doing since COVID, and all. It's in Pasadumkeag, a little south of Lincoln.
I'm familiar with it. Are you, Barb? Nabizin was, it has a board of directors that includes a number of Wabanaki people along with other allies. And it's a place where they are learning about traditional healing and herbs and medicine. They hold events there. And I can just tell you that it seems to be a strongly Wabanaki-led endeavor. It's a beautiful place, and they have a website and they're on Facebook. They've been sponsoring Passamaquoddy lessons, I think, online. They've been doing a lot more through Zoom because of COVID, but I do follow them on Facebook, and I have been there a number of times, and they seem to be doing okay throughout this whole period. So they have an active board of directors. I think they have a fairly new executive director now. So you can look them up, and they're still very much alive, I think.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear.
So there's a question from Sarah Norsworthy. Sarah, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Also, thank you, Shirley and Barb. I have, again, sort of a question similar, I guess, to Alex's in this moment, pandemic moment, in this moment in all these ways you are talking about a circle. Towards the end of the book, you mentioned learning through the skin. For over 2 years, so many of us have been remote in different contexts. I have the privilege of teaching remotely. And there is something that we're missing by not gathering together. You had mentioned, Barb, that this is a gathering, and it is. I can feel that in this space. And at the same time, I'm wondering if there's anything that we can think about bringing into our digital spaces, which seem to be sort of something that we need to have, a lesson from the gathering that we could bring to our spaces that we might not have considered, that your scholarship, your narrative scholarship, right, your relational scholarship has given you. I'm wondering if there's any wisdom. And then this tag question as an educator is there a resource you'd recommend, a book for children, thinking about sort of the kindergarten through 8th grade? Is there a particular text, Barb, you mentioned how you love books, that you would think about sharing most particularly around bringing some of this knowledge and wisdom to children?
That would be, my goodness, I'd have to write down a whole bunch of books. About 30 years ago, there was really very few books about Indigenous people or even relationships. But now on the internet, it's everywhere. And so I would just suggest you go and Google. That's a whole, I jokingly say, Google is a whole Indigenous word now. As well as other words that we use, and so on. But what I would suggest is, I don't like this way of gathering either, but it is the way we have to do it for now to stay safe. Elders do not like the Zoom or internet space, and they prefer to go gather. Even I've just recently coordinated a couple of elders gatherings where they are going to be working with youth and passing on knowledge. You can't do that in this kind of forum. So we're going to we know we're going to find a way to do it and keep the youth and keep our elders safe. I have been part of training sessions where, there has been ceremonies, and Thunderbird Partnership Foundation here in Canada they've done training on a number of different things. So I would suggest you look at Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. And there are now children's books. There is an openness there, and a lot of artists among us that would bring that. So I can't really cite them off right now. But it is still a way. One way that I've found that is really helpful for bring us together is that we do a language program. And every Thursday at 7 o'clock, I host a Zoom session with Mi'kmaq all over, like in United States, as well as Canada. There are Mi'kmaq everywhere. We're like prolific, we're going everywhere. We like to travel. So they're finding this little language site, and we are learning together, and we're finding all of these wonderful YouTube videos. We're finding these books, and we're teaching each other. And I'm saying, how do you save a language? Because many of our languages are almost dead. We'll teach you. I'll teach you, and we'll teach each other. I would think non-native people I would love to hear Mi'kmaq coming from one of you. And it might even change your mind, because there are concepts in our language that are so incredible, and children would love it. Children would just jump into that and have a great time with language, with the Mi'kmaq, with the Passamaquoddy, with the Wabanaki, all the Wabanaki, Wolastoqey. Why not? Let's bring it back. And then you'll see a kind of how you see the worldview. Language comes from the land. And if you learn this language, you're going to be, there's a way to reconnect with the Earth Mother. with Grandmother Moon, with, you know, all of those. It's so learn a language and get your kids to learn it. But you might have to find that some people are still tired of being like they're afraid. But I'm telling, and there's more and more of us saying, I don't care who learns the language. There was a fellow here who just recently got their doctorate using Mi'kmaq completely. And it's coming back. So that's all I can say about that. Go to Google, ask Grandma Google, she knows all.
Hi, Barb, thank you. And I will say, I'm not often on TikTok, but there's an Ojibwe man who does Ojibwe, a word of the day, and he gives culture and language and story. And so thank you for reminding me. That's a wonderful, wonderful entry for us and for children. So thank you.
And I could only add that in the book on page 238 under other resources, there's some websites there, and this one was courtesy of Gisatanamuk, who told me about this one. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. Oyate, O-Y-A-T-E, is a native-run website, particularly for educators seeking to identify appropriate books and resources for young people about Native Americans. And it's www.oyate.org. And maybe we could send that one out when we send out the recording. And I'll just take a minute to plug a really recent book for young people that is by Chris Newell, who is the son of Wayne Newell, who is in the book. And it's called If You Live During the Plymouth Thanksgiving. And it is the Thanksgiving story told from the Wampanoag perspective. And it is a scholastic book publication. So it came out just before Thanksgiving and people went crazy about it. And I think it would be a wonderful book to recommend.
So on the event page for this event on the Merrill Memorial Library website, I'll update with a list of resources for everybody next week.
And
so in addition to an email.
And we do have a whole list of books, articles, websites, and things in the back of the gatherings, which I'm sure could already be updated.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, could I just share one thing? In terms of getting the book, if you go to our website, there's a tab called Buy the Book. The publisher's website, University of Toronto Press, we've sold out of the second printing of the hardcover. And so they say it's temporarily out of stock, but they just put up, the third printing is going to be paperback. So it will be more affordable, and that's very exciting. And it's not quite ready yet, but you can pre-order the paperback. Also, even if it's out at the publisher, the hardcover is still available. I've been checking. There's some you can get through Amazon. There are a few, I've checked in a few local bookstores, and you know, you can still, on some bookstores, you can find it, but they've been selling very well. But you might check there. There's also like Barnes and Noble, and some of the online ones will still have hardcover copies, and the paperback will be out soon.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful event. I just can't thank you all enough for participating. Obviously, Barb and Shirley, I feel like I have two new friends.
It's been great.
The book has been just absolutely wonderful and life-changing for me as well. So it's, and that was my son, Alex Briggs, who's in Saratoga Springs, New York. So, you know, shout out to Alex for attending as well. So thank you all so much for tonight. Please get in touch with us at the library and we will forward other questions to Shirley and Barb, should you have things that come up that you weren't able to express this evening. It was absolutely terrific to see everybody tonight.
Thank you all so much. I've
Thank you.
really enjoyed this. And thanks, Barb. It's been
Thank
great
you.
to
And
do
all of you.
with you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Hey,
Stay-
everyone.
Stay warm. Hi, Carla.
Bye-bye.